He received a cassette tape in the mail, 49 years after his sister was declared dead in Vietnam. There was no note, no return address, just a voice he hadn't heard since 1974, whispering his name and begging him not to trust anyone. That's when Caleb knew June was alive, or at least she had been. Welcome to Echo Stories, where the quietest voices often carry the loudest truths. Subscribe now and uncover powerful stories every day. Tales of forgotten heroes, hidden pasts, and the burdens carried in silence. Caleb Lawson had never been the type to cry. Not during boot camp, not when his mother died, not even when the government handed him a flag and called his sister a hero. But that morning, as he stood in his kitchen in Memphis, holding a cassette in one hand and staring at the cheap mailer it came in, his knees buckled. The tape was unmarked, no postmark, no name. Just a scratchy old cassette with faint pencil writing on the label. Play alone. He dug out his old tape player from a kitchen drawer, the one he hadn't touched since the 90s. It still had dust in the buttons. He set it on the counter, hesitated, then pushed play. The hiss of magnetic tape filled the room, then silence. Then, a woman's voice. "Caleb, it's me." His breath caught. He hadn't heard that voice in nearly 50 years. He reached for the counter to steady himself. "I don't have much time. If you're hearing this, then it means they're watching again. I need you to listen to me. Don't go to the VA. Don't call anyone. And whatever you do, don't trust the man in the gray sedan." Click. That was it. The tape ended. Caleb rewound it twice, hoping there'd be more, but the second message was only static. He checked the mailer again. No sender, no postmark. Just his name handwritten in blue ink, like someone who knew how his hand used to shake when he got nervous. The way June used to calm him down. She had been 23 when she disappeared in Vietnam, an Army communications specialist working on covert jungle transmissions. They said she'd been ambushed, declared KIA. Caleb never got a body, just ashes, and a note that said the remains were presumed to be hers. He had never quite believed it. Now all the quiet doubt he'd buried over decades came crashing back. He sat down at the kitchen table, the tape still spinning in the player. Outside, the cicadas had just started singing through the Tennessee heat. Caleb closed his eyes and whispered to the air, "June, what the hell did you get into?" The rest of the day was a blur. He couldn't focus on anything, not the mail, not the local news buzzing in the background, not the medication schedule taped to the fridge. He kept thinking back to the sound of her voice. Older, tired, but unmistakably hers. He went to the closet and pulled out a weathered shoebox labeled June. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside were faded photos, an Army insignia patch, a yellowing newspaper clipping about her unit's deployment, and the last letter she had mailed from overseas. He read it slowly, tracing the looped handwriting with a trembling finger. "Tell Mom I'm eating better," it said. "But don't let her send more cookies. The ants are winning." Even in the middle of a jungle, June had found ways to make him laugh. The tape. It didn't sound like a joke. That night, he didn't sleep. Every noise outside startled him. At 3:12 a.m., headlights passed slowly across his living room window. A gray sedan. He froze. No engine rev, no screeching tires, just a silent crawl through the quiet suburb. It might have been a coincidence, or it might have been something else. By morning, he'd made up his mind. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in 30 years. It rang 6 times. Then a voice answered. "If you're calling me, it's either a funeral or a war." Caleb took a breath. "It's about June." Silence. Then the voice said, "I'll be there by noon." He hung up and sat quietly, watching the sunrise filter through the blinds. June's voice echoed in his mind, not with fear, but urgency. Whatever happened back then, it wasn't over, and now it had found its way back to him. At exactly 11:57 a.m., a matte black Dodge Ram pulled into Caleb's driveway. The man who stepped out hadn't changed much, at least not in Caleb's eyes. Just more gray in the beard, a bit more caution in his steps. He wore an old Marine Corps hat and carried no bag, no phone. Just him and a thermos of coffee. "Eli," Caleb said, opening the door before the knock came. "Caleb," Eli nodded. "Still hate phones, huh?" Only the ones that ring. They sat in the kitchen, the tape player still on the counter like a sacred artifact. Caleb played the message. Eli said nothing while it ran. When it ended, he leaned back and exhaled through his nose. I always thought they were lying about June, he finally said. But this means she lived longer than they said, a lot longer. You worked with her, Caleb said. Eli nodded. Not officially. She was Army, I was Marine SIGINT. But our paths crossed. Joint Ops in '74, jungle relay missions. She was one of the sharpest damn minds I ever saw. Quiet, but fast. She could decrypt field chatter faster than command could process it. And she was stubborn, wouldn't leave a transmission incomplete even under fire. She mentioned a man in a gray sedan. Eli's expression darkened. Then she's in real danger. Or was. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old envelope. Inside was a photo. June and Eli standing in front of a camouflaged radio truck, both smudged with sweat and dirt. Caleb had never seen it before. I kept this, Eli said. Didn't feel right to share it when they said she was gone. But now, Caleb stared at the photo. Her eyes were tired even then. Not scared. Calculated. She looked like she already knew more than she should. There's something else, Caleb said, rising to grab the shoebox again. He handed Eli the old letter, the one from Vietnam. Eli read it carefully, then flipped it over. You never noticed this? What? Eli held the page to the light. In the right margin, nearly invisible under the print, was a sequence of numbers. A cipher. She left you a code, Eli whispered, either for safety or for after. They spent the next hour deciphering it. The numbers pointed to a post office box in Helena, Arkansas, 3 hours away. Caleb hadn't driven that far in years, but Eli said he'd take them. We go tomorrow. I'll bring my truck and a backup map. No GPS. No phones, Caleb added. No phones, Eli agreed. That night, Caleb barely slept. Every noise outside startled him. At 3:12 a.m., headlights passed slowly across his living room window. A gray sedan. He froze. No engine rev, no screeching tires, just a silent crawl through the quiet suburb. It might have been a coincidence, or it might have been something else. He stayed up the rest of the night, sitting in his recliner with the old .38 tucked under a blanket on his lap. For the first time in years, his military training didn't feel like a memory. It felt like instinct. Breathing through the tension, counting seconds between shadows, watching the world through blinds. At dawn, he walked outside, barefoot on the concrete, just to feel the chill of morning and remind himself he was still here. When Eli arrived, he carried a duffel bag with a sidearm tucked deep inside. Caleb didn't ask. He just got in. The drive was long and hot, the windows cracked open and a country radio station fading in and out. Neither spoke much until they reached the outskirts of Helena. The post office was a squat brick building near an abandoned rail line. Inside, it smelled of old paper and floor wax. The clerk barely looked up. We're here for box 211, Eli said. Need a key, the clerk replied. Caleb held up the envelope. She sent this to me. Her handwriting. Can we see the box? The clerk sighed, stood and led them to the back wall. Box 211 had a broken lock. The clerk jiggled it, opened it with a paperclip and stepped back. Inside was a small padded envelope, no bigger than a paperback book. No return information. Just Caleb's name again. He opened it slowly. Inside was a second cassette, this one labeled June, Final Transmission, and beneath it, a Polaroid. June in civilian clothes, gray hair, wrinkles, sitting on a bench with a young woman beside her. The date on the back read 2003. She made it, Caleb whispered, but Eli was staring past the photo. She's not alone. Caleb turned it over again. There, in the background, was a man in a gray sedan, parked at the edge of the park, watching. He hadn't expected the second tape to shake him, but the label, Final Transmission, sounded like goodbye. Still, he knew what he had to do. He would listen. Alone. Just like she asked. And this time, he would be ready. Back home, Caleb set the second cassette on his desk like a fragile relic. He didn't rush. He made tea instead of coffee, closed the curtains, and took the phone off the hook. Eli waited in the truck. This was something Caleb had to do alone. June's voice, her last, deserved silence. The tape clicked, hissed, and then her voice emerged. Older, slower, but steady. Caleb, if you're hearing this, I'm likely gone, or close. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you more. I never stopped being your sister, but I also never stopped being a soldier. She paused. He could hear her breath shake. After Saigon fell, I was taken by our own, not the enemy. That's what the report won't say. They didn't want me talking about the transmissions I intercepted. The ones about Phoenix operations, black sites, American signatures on Vietnamese soil, and in Laos. Things they said didn't exist. But they did. Caleb leaned forward. His hands were trembling. They gave me a choice. Testify and disappear forever, or vanish quietly with a new name, new life. I chose the second. But I kept records. I recorded everything I could remember, names, coordinates, call signs, and I mailed them, one box at a time, all over the country, to people I trusted or hoped I could. A rustle, like paper. One box went to a man named Ellis James. He's likely gone now, but his grandson, maybe he's listening. If you are, look in the attic. There's a floorboard, third from the corner by the chimney. It's taped under that. You'll find the next piece. Caleb blinked. That was a whole new thread. Another person involved, another part of the puzzle. I spent the last decade trying to live quietly, but they never stopped watching. I saw him again, the man with the gray sedan. He's older too, but he still parks 2 blocks away, still reads the same paper. If I vanish, he'll be the reason. Her voice cracked. But I want you to know, I don't regret anything. Not the mission, not the exile, not even the silence. Because I believed in protecting people, even if it meant disappearing myself. She paused. A long one this time. Caleb, the last time I saw you, you were 13. You were crying in the rain. I never got to hug you goodbye. So if this is goodbye, I want you to feel this. There was a soft sound, like fingers brushing paper. I kept every letter you sent me, even after they told you I was dead. They let them come through, probably to track you. But I read every word, and they saved me. Another breath, then her final words. Be safe, be still, be loud if you have to, but don't ever forget who you are. The tape clicked and ended. Caleb sat frozen, hands balled in his lap. It felt like someone had poured light into all the shadows of the last 50 years, and now everything made sense, and hurt more than ever. When Eli came inside, Caleb handed him the tape but said nothing. We need to find Ellis James's grandson, Eli said. Agreed. But first, they needed rest. Real rest. The kind you get after crossing a line you can't come back from. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. Instead, he opened his father's trunk, one he hadn't touched in decades, and pulled out old journals, newspaper clippings, maps. Then he opened a drawer and found something he'd forgotten, his own enlistment papers, yellowed and creased. He had signed them the year June disappeared. It was never coincidence. It was always orbit. He spent the early hours tracing locations mentioned in June's first tape. Some were camps, some were empty fields now, but a few were still marked on maps, abandoned but not forgotten. When dawn broke, he looked up Ellis James's obituary. Deceased, 2019. Survived by one grandson, Raymond James. Montana, Eli came in with 2 coffees. Caleb looked up and said, Road trip? Eli grinned. Thought you'd never ask. Montana welcomed them with dry wind and open skies. Raymond James lived on the outskirts of Billings, in a pale blue farmhouse tucked behind overgrown hedges and rusted fencing. He was 42, broad-shouldered, wore denim-like armor, and met them on the porch with suspicion. You drove from Arkansas? He asked. For the truth? Caleb replied. Raymond squinted. You're June's brother, Caleb nodded. She said you might have something. Raymond didn't speak. He turned and disappeared into the house. When he returned, he was carrying a battered shoebox wrapped in duct tape. My grandfather said to give this to someone who mentioned the name Yellowbird and looked like hell. Checks out, Eli muttered. Raymond stepped aside. Take your time. Inside the box was a bundle of cassette tapes, 7 of them, each labeled by year, 1975 through 1981, each one handwritten in June's meticulous scrawl. Along with them, a folded cloth map and a small rusted dog tag that read, J. Winters. She documented everything, Caleb whispered. There were logs of unauthorized ops, civilian casualties, asset extractions buried under fake paperwork. But what chilled them both was Tape 5, 1979. It contained a recording of a meeting in a remote jungle safe house, June's voice, another man's, a name, Colonel Matheson. Caleb knew that name. So did Eli. "He's not just retired," Eli said. "He's in Washington, private contractor now, security consulting." "And still watching," Caleb added. The gray sedan wasn't a ghost. It was a leash. Someone making sure the dog never stopped barking. They stayed up all night listening, transcribing, scanning the maps. Every detail lined up. June had spent her final decades tracing the long shadow of a covert operation that extended from Vietnam to D.C. And she had handed them the torch. But Caleb didn't want revenge. He wanted truth. They uploaded the logs anonymously, files to several journalists, former veterans groups, a senator or two who weren't fully owned yet. Then they boxed up the tapes and sent them to a military archive, marked as historical artifacts. A week passed, then two. On the third week, Caleb received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photo, him and June as children, sitting by a river, eating sandwiches. On the back someone had scrawled, "Now they'll remember." Caleb sat down on his porch and wept. For the first time in his life, the burden felt shared. For the first time, he didn't feel alone. That fall, Eli moved into the guest house. They fished in the afternoons, repaired old radios at night. Neither talked much about the tapes. But every now and then, when the wind hit right, Caleb would look at the trees and whisper, "Fly, yellow bird." And he'd imagine her nodding from the sky. If this journey stirred something in you, share it. Subscribe for more untold stories of strength, silence, and the ones who kept their promises even when no one was listening.